Snow blanketed the quiet town of Willow Creek like a heavy quilt. Wind howled softly through the narrow alleys, stirring powder off rooftops. Inside, Stitches and Hope, a small sewing shop, glowing with golden lamplight. Clara Reed swept the last bits of thread from the floor. At 25, Clara lived alone above her shop. Her platinum blonde hair, softly curled, was pulled back with a velvet ribbon. Her hands were calloused from hours of needlework, her eyes tired but gentle. She reached to switch off the final lamp when a faint sound cut through the wind. A cry she stilled. Then came another. She stepped to the back door and opened it slowly. The cold struck her instantly. Snow swirled in the alley, silent and white, except for the soft, panicked cries coming from near the stacked firewood. Clara's heart thudded. She stepped outside, boots crunching over ice. There, half buried in snow, sat a basket lined with deep purple velvet. Inside, 2 newborn girls. They were wrapped tightly in matching blankets. Tiny pink dresses made of soft lamb's wool peeked out. Their faces were red from crying fists, clenched mouths open in protest. Clara gasped and dropped to her knees. Each baby wore a small silver locket, identical pendants, a single falling leaf. Beneath them, tucked into the blanket, was a torn photograph. Only half of a smiling woman's face remained. No note, no names, no explanation. Clara looked around. The alley was empty. No footsteps, no voices, only the sound of her own breath and 2 fragile lives crying in the snow. Her hands trembled. She should call someone, report it, do what anyone would do. But she could not move. One baby whimpered. The other reached out blindly, and her tiny fingers wrapped around Clara's thumb. A sob escaped her. The feeling was immediate, overwhelming, and terrifying. A pull deep in her chest, like something had been sewn into her heart in an instant. She gently gathered both babies into her arms. They were warm, impossibly small, and heartbreakingly real. Clara stood in the snow, blinking back tears. The world had always been quiet for her, but this silence felt sacred. She looked up to the gray sky. From now on, she whispered, voice shaking, I will be the thread that keeps you together. And with 2 babies pressed against her chest, Clara stepped back inside the door, closing softly behind her as snow continued to fall. It took weeks of paperwork, phone calls, and silent prayers before it became official. Clara Reed was now the legal guardian of the 2 girls found in the snow. No one came forward. No family, no claims, just silence. She named them Lily and Rose. Lily, the older by minutes, was delicate, dreamy, and always holding a crayon in her tiny hand. She hummed while she drew, often on the back of old receipts or fabric scraps Clara left lying around. Rose was different, curious, bold, and bursting with questions. She climbed onto chairs, peeked into cabinets, and once tried to hand-stitch a sock when she was 2. Clara sewed each dress by hand, soft and simple, adding little ruffles or bows as they grew. She kept every outgrown piece folded in a wooden chest, like pages in a storybook, only she could read. 5 years passed in quiet, messy, beautiful rhythm. Mornings began with cereal spills and giggles. Days were filled with fabric chalk dust, lullabies, and tangled thread. Clara worked late into the night, pinning patterns and hemming sleeves, sometimes with Rose snoring on a pillow beside her, or Lily curled up in a corner with a picture book. She barely made enough. But the girls never knew, lack only warmth. Clara learned to live with tired eyes and full arms. She learned the names of Lily's favorite colors and how Rose liked her apples peeled, but not too skinny. She memorized the scent of their hair after bath time. She kissed bruised knees, wiped away bad dreams, and taught them how to sew a button. In every way that mattered, they were hers. And yet some nights, when the house was dark and the only light came from the tiny lamp above the sewing table, Clara would take out the old photograph and 2 silver lockets from the tin box beneath her bed. The falling leaf pendant still glimmered faintly untouched. The torn photo still held the same woman's smile, but no name, no clue. The mystery remained a knot she had never been able to untie. She told herself it did not matter. But sometimes, Lily would ask questions in her soft, careful voice. One afternoon, while drawing in the corner with Rose, Lily looked up and said, "Mommy, where's our daddy?" Clara froze. She looked at Lily, those eyes wide and wondering, so full of trust. I, I don't know, sweetheart," she whispered, kneeling down to stroke Lily's cheek. "But you have me. You'll always have me." Lily nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Clara smiled through the tightness in her chest, kissed the top of her daughter's head, and whispered the words she always came back to when the world didn't make sense. "We're stitched together, my loves, and I'm not letting go." The community center shimmered with soft lights, white tablecloths, and the hum of polite conversation. It was the annual Starlight Charity Ball, a charity event supporting children in foster care. Clara had been invited last minute to assist with custom suit fittings for high-profile guests. She rarely left her small town, much less for events like this, but someone had recommended her work, and the organizers needed a local tailor. She accepted partly for the exposure, mostly because she could not afford to say no. She brought Lily and Rose with her, not wanting to leave them behind. The twins wore matching pink princess dresses, each handmade with tulle skirts and embroidered hems. Their blonde hair was tied up in tiny twin buns, and in their hands they each clutched a Ziploc bag of heart-shaped cookies Clara had baked that morning. They stayed close to her side as she adjusted lapels and pinned sleeves. The girls whispered to each other in their secret twin language, occasionally offering cookies to the tuxedoed guests who passed by. Everyone smiled. The twins lit up the room like sunlight against a gray wall. Across the ballroom, Julian Thorne stood near the stage. The 38-year-old CEO of Thorne Enterprises was known for his sharp intellect, private life, and relentless philanthropy. Tonight, he was the event's lead sponsor, delivering a short speech and posing for a few photos before disappearing as he often did. He had just taken a sip of champagne when he saw them. Two little girls in pink dresses, blonde about 5. Their faces, especially the eyes, pierced straight through him. His heart stopped. His vision blurred. They looked just like Elena. His late wife had worn that exact same expression when she was deep in thought. One child clutching her drawing close to her chest, the other twirling on her toes, and the necklaces, the silver chains, glittered faintly under the lights. No, it could not be. But it was. He would know that leaf pendant anywhere. It was an heirloom from the Thorne family, custom made for Elena before the twins were born. Only 2 had ever been created, one for each child. His legs moved before his mind caught up. He crossed the room, each step weighed down with disbelief. He stopped just in front of the girls, crouching to meet their eyes. Rose looked up first. "Hi," she said boldly. Her shoelace was undone. Julian knelt, fingers trembling slightly, and reached to tie it. As he bent down, her tiny hand brushed against his. Then came the sentence that fractured something deep inside him. "You smell like my bedtime pillow," Rose said casually. "The pink one." Julian froze. He looked up slowly into the girl's eyes. They were Elena's eyes. His eyes. Everything inside him twisted. Pain, hope, disbelief, longing. Lily stepped back slightly, clutching her cookie bag. Clara had just turned from her client, noticing the man kneeling by her daughters. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping forward with a polite smile. "Are they in your way?" Julian stood slowly, brushing his hands on his suit pants. He forced himself to look composed. "No, not at all," he said, voice lower than usual. They're lovely." "Are they yours?" Clara nodded. "Yes, they're my daughters. Twins." He asked, though he already knew. "Yes." Her eyes were kind but cautious. He smiled softly. "They remind me of someone I used to know." There was a silence, just a breath too long. Then Clara gently called the girls back to her side. Julian watched as they skipped toward their mother dresses, swaying curls, bouncing, giggling in unison. The silver locket sparkled under the chandelier. He stood still, the ballroom noise fading behind him. Because in that moment, he knew they were not just strangers in pink dresses. They were his. Julian had not slept since the gala. He sat in his penthouse apartment, staring out at the lights of the city, unable to shake the image of those 2 little girls. their golden hair, their silver lockets, their eyes, Arabelle and Leora. No, he had buried them. He had mourned them. He had accepted their absence like a wound that would never stop bleeding. And yet something inside him, something deeper than logic or grief, whispered, "They are alive." He scoured the event photos online until he found what he needed, a candid shot of the crowd. In the corner of the frame, just visible, was a storefront sign, "Stitches and Hope." Below it, the name Clara Reed. 2 hours later, Julian was behind the wheel of his car, driving through slush and fog into the Oregon countryside. His heart pounded the entire way. The town was small, quiet, the kind of place where time moved slower. He found the shop, nestled between a flower store and a diner. Quaint, with ivy creeping up one side and pastel curtains in the windows. Late afternoon mist drifted through the street as he stepped out of his car. Inside the shop, Clara was sweeping. The little bell above the door had not chimed yet. She paused. There was a knock at the door. Slow, even not rushed. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the front. Lily and Rose, dressed in their usual pink dresses, were sitting on the floor, playing with fabric swatches. At the sound, they perked up and followed behind her, giggling. Clara opened the door and froze. Julian stood there tall, in a charcoal coat, holding his hat in one hand. His eyes, rimmed with fatigue, softened the moment he saw the three of them together. Lily blinked. "Mommy, it's the vest man." Rose squinted, then grinned. "He looks like he came from a fairy tale." Clara's brows drew together. "Mr. Thorne, how did you—" "I'm sorry," Julian said gently. "I hope I'm not intruding. I need a suit tailored for an upcoming conference, and you were the first person I thought of." She hesitated. Then, out of politeness or curiosity, she stepped aside. "Come in." The shop was warm and inviting, its shelves lined with ribbons, bolts of fabric, and finished dresses hanging neatly on the wall. There were sketches pinned near the window, and a child's crayon drawing of a princess taped beside them. Julian stepped inside, his gaze scanning the space, then resting on the twins. They sat down beside him without hesitation. Rose grabbed a piece of paper and scribbled a purple blob with legs. She held it up. "This is you," she said proudly. "In Mommy's wedding dress." Clara gasped and laughed, flustered. "Rose." But Julian chuckled, placing a hand over his chest. "If wearing a wedding dress gets me two princesses like you, I'll take it." Clara knelt beside him and began taking measurements, her fingers brushing his sleeve. She noticed how his gaze lingered not on her, but on the girls. It was not admiration. It was not amusement. It was grief and longing, and something painfully close to recognition. Rose, yawning, climbed into Julian's lap without a word. She leaned against his chest and fell asleep. He did not move. He looked down at the small bundle of warmth and trust cradled against him like a fragile treasure. His arms wrapped around her, slowly, reverently. His throat worked as he fought back tears. Later that night, after he had gone, Clara moved quietly through the apartment above the shop. The twins were asleep. She unlocked the drawer of an old cabinet and pulled out the photograph she had kept hidden for 5 years. For the first time, she looked closely at the torn image, the missing half. Her heart stopped. It was him. She opened her laptop fingers, trembling, and typed in a search. Thorne family fire twins. News articles flooded the screen. Headlines about a biotech mogul, a house fire, a tragedy. It was all there. But one thing didn't make sense. If he is their father, why were they left alone? And why hasn't anyone come looking for them? She stared at the photo in her hand. 2 babies swaddled in purple velvet, and she whispered to herself, unsure if it was fear or fate, she felt rising in her chest. What have I brought into our lives? At first, Clara tried to brush it off. The muddy footprints on the porch. Large, deep, leading up to the door and disappearing just as suddenly. Could have been from a passerby. Maybe a delivery person. Maybe a prank. But something about them felt watched. Then came the shadow behind her in the grocery store parking lot. Heavy steps too close. She turned fast. Nothing. Just the sound of a cart rattling in the wind. A chill ran up her spine. She gripped the girl's hands tighter as they walked to the car. In the evenings, she double-checked the locks, made sure the curtains were drawn tight. Yet the feeling lingered like a draft from a crack she couldn't find. Then came the night of the storm. The rain pattered softly on the windows as Clara stitched quietly under a warm lamp glow. Lily and Rose were upstairs tucked in after a dinner of tomato soup and grilled cheese. The sewing machine hummed beneath her hands. Then shatter. A piercing crack of glass exploding echoed through the room. Clara jerked up, heart racing. A brick lay near her feet, surrounded by shards of her display window. She ran outside, grabbing the closest thing. A fabric shears from the table, but whoever it was had already fled into the night. Her breath caught as her eyes landed on the wall beside the shop door, spray-painted in red. Don't dig up the past. She stood frozen, soaked in rain, panting. Then she ran back inside and raced upstairs where Lily and Rose were crying from their beds. She gathered them in her arms. "It's okay. It's okay. I've got you," she whispered over and over, even as her own hands shook. The next morning, Julian showed up. He didn't knock. He stormed in the moment the open sign flipped face pale with restrained fury. He had read about the attack in a tabloid blog. Gossip sites already speculating about the mysterious incident at the seamstress's shop. Clara was sweeping glass from the floor, her palm bandaged with a napkin. Blood had soaked through. "What happened?" Julian's voice was low-strained. "I'm fine," she said automatically, brushing past him. But Julian grabbed her wrist gently. "You're bleeding." He knelt, took out a handkerchief from his coat, and began wrapping her hand with slow, careful precision. His fingers trembled. "You need security," he said. "Now I can't afford. I can." Clara opened her mouth to protest again, but the look in his eyes stopped her. That night, a black SUV with tinted windows parked discreetly across the street. 2 trained security guards took shifts watching the perimeter. Lily and Rose waved to them from the window, thinking it was all a game. Julian didn't leave either. He slept in his car, outside the shop, one eye always open. And inside the home, something shifted. He became part of their rhythm. Lily asked if he could help braid her hair one morning, and though he fumbled, she giggled through the whole thing. Rose taught him how to make pancakes shaped like bears. Clara watched it all unfold from the corner of the room, a growing ache in her chest. There was no pretending in the way Julian looked at them. No pretending in the way he lifted Rose when she stumbled, or the way he hummed a lullaby that Lily said felt like something from a dream. No man could fake that kind of love. And Clara was running out of reasons to ignore the truth. One night, when the girls were asleep and the sewing machine finally quieted, Clara poured 2 cups of chamomile tea and sat across from Julian in the small workroom. No more hiding. Julian stared into his cup. Then he spoke. "She died 2 months after giving birth. Elena." Clara didn't interrupt. "I was barely holding on," he continued. "The girls were all I had left then the fire. They said it was faulty wiring. The nursery caught first." He paused. "I buried 2 empty coffins," he whispered, "because there wasn't enough to find." Clara's breath caught. He looked up, his eyes raw. "I stopped living that day. I just kept breathing until I saw them in this shop." She reached into her apron and pulled out a small laminated photograph, the one she had hidden all these years. She handed it to him silently. Julian stared at the torn image, his own smiling face, Elena beside him, her belly swollen with life. He turned it over. Faded ink bled through the paper. "For the one who finds them." His throat tightened. Clara's voice cracked as she said, "I think they were meant to find you again, but maybe they were meant to find me too." He didn't speak, but in that moment, something in the air softened, like a thread that had been tangled too long finally beginning to unwind. The truth had teeth, and now it was finally biting back. After the DNA test confirmed what Julian already felt in his bones, that Lily and Rose were his daughters, He could no longer sit still. It wasn't enough to have them back in his life. He needed answers. He needed justice. The questions that haunted him for 5 years screamed louder now. How had his daughter survived a fire that left nothing behind? Who orchestrated it, and why? The deeper he dug, the more a single name surfaced over and over: Marcus Vane. Once Julian's trusted second in command, Marcus had been brilliant, charming, and ambitious. But ambition had curdled into greed. When Julian discovered Marcus had sold confidential research to a competitor, he fired him on the spot. Marcus vanished without a word, but apparently not without a plan. It all fit together now. The fire had happened just weeks after Elena's funeral, when Julian was barely functioning. Marcus had waited until he was at his weakest, his world unraveling. The perfect time to strike. Through quiet contacts, Julian confirmed what he feared. Marcus had paid off the private security at his estate. Surveillance footage from that week had been mysteriously wiped, and the nursery supposedly destroyed by electrical failure had been recently rewired by a contractor linked to Marcus's shell company. Then came the biggest breakthrough. Clara remembered an elderly neighbor who once mentioned having a video doorbell before the fire. They visited him together. The man, Mr. Henderson, now used a newer model. But when Julian explained the situation, the man rummaged through his drawer and pulled out an old dusty flip phone. "It never worked after the storm," he muttered. "But I think I backed up something weird on it." They brought the phone to a tech shop, held their breath for 2 days, and finally the video emerged. The image was grainy, flickering, but unmistakable. A tall man in a dark overcoat approached the thorn gate late at night. He glanced around nervously, then entered using a key. He returned 10 minutes later with something bundled in a blanket. And again, the next night, his face briefly turned toward the camera, a crooked smile, eyes too familiar. Marcus Vane. It was dated just 3 days before the fire. Julian stood frozen, watching the footage again and again. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "He took them," Julian murmured. "He took my daughters, and he let me believe they were dead." The pain in his voice was raw, deeper than anything Clara had heard from him. She reached out, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then take it back," she said quietly. "All of it, not with anger, with justice." Julian nodded slowly, eyes still on the screen. "Justice," he repeated. "For them. For Elena. For you. Because now it wasn't just about what was stolen. It was about what could finally be reclaimed." The storm had a name now, and Julian was ready to face it. Just days after uncovering the damning footage of Marcus, Julian and Clara filed an official lawsuit against him. The charges were serious: child abduction, staging a false crime scene, intimidation of a witness, destruction of property, and emotional damages. The case shook the city. Headlines flared. Twins thought dead found alive. CEO's former associate under fire. Thorne family secrets resurface in stunning legal battle. The media could not get enough of the Thorne tragedy unraveling in real time. But Julian wasn't interested in spectacle. He wanted truth and closure. At a press conference held just outside the courthouse, Julian stood before the cameras in a simple dark suit. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of 5 years of silence. "My daughters were stolen from me. My wife was barely cold in the ground when someone I trusted took what little I had left. And for years, I believed they were gone forever." He paused, voice wavering only slightly. "But someone found them. Someone who didn't have to care, but did. A woman with no wealth, no obligation, and no reason to believe anything good would come of it. Chose love anyway." He held up a folded letter. "This is from her. Clara Reed." The courtroom fell silent as Julian's attorney unfolded the page and read aloud. "I did not give birth to them, but from the moment I held them wrapped in velvet and crying in the snow, they became flesh of my flesh. I sewed every dress they wore. I stayed up every night they were sick. I've heard them laugh and cry and call me mama with all the faith a child has. That is real. And if love makes a parent, then I am theirs too." Across town, Clara sat in the back of her quiet home, watching the broadcast alone. Her hands trembled as her words filled the room. She hadn't meant for the world to hear her heart, but she was glad they did. In court, more pieces of the truth came forward. Nurse Holloway, a retired nurse who had once cared for Elena Thorne, stepped onto the witness stand. Her voice cracked as she admitted everything. How Marcus had approached her under the guise of an emergency. How she'd handed over the girls, thinking it was for their safety. How he'd threatened her to keep quiet. "I didn't know," she whispered, "what he would do with them. I didn't know he'd leave them." The final blow came from two tiny voices. Lily and Rose appeared via pre-recorded video from their bedroom, smiling nervously in matching pink dresses. Their hands clutched each other tightly. "We don't want to go anywhere," Lily said. "Mommy loves us," Rose added. "Daddy loves us now too." Lily nodded. "We want to stay with Mommy and Daddy." That moment cracked even the hardest hearts in the courtroom. The verdict wasn't long in coming. Marcus was officially indicted. Bail was denied. He left the courtroom in handcuffs, face pale and defeated. But the real moment of reckoning happened later that evening. Clara was locking up the shop when she noticed something sitting on her sewing table. A wooden box tied with twine. A small note lay beside it in Julian's handwriting, for the woman who stitched a broken world back together. Inside the box was the old sewing machine her late mother once used, the one that had been rusting in the attic long beyond repair. Except now, it gleamed like new. Its gears had been oiled, the metal polished. But it wasn't just the machine that made her breath catch. Fixed to the front was a small brass nameplate, Elena Thorne Atelier, where love begins one stitch at a time. Clara stared at it, heart pounding. Her hands covered her mouth as tears spilled freely. Julian had brought her past and present together in a single act of quiet devotion. He stepped forward from the doorway, unsure. She didn't hesitate. Clara walked straight into his arms, wrapped around him, like she had always known that was where she belonged. This wasn't the end of their fight, but it was the beginning of a family finally being made whole. A year had passed. The sign above the little sewing shop now read, "Clara and Daughters." Below it, in delicate script, the original name remained, Stitches and Hope, a quiet reminder of the night everything changed. Inside, soft laughter echoed through the cozy space. Every Saturday, the shop opened its doors to a small sewing class just for girls from the local orphanage. Little hands learned to stitch hems and buttons to mend what was broken, just as Clara once had not, with fabric, but with love. Today, however, the classroom was a garden. Pink streamers danced in the breeze. A long wooden table was covered in strawberry cupcakes, paper crowns, and juice boxes. And right in the center stood a cake shaped like an old sewing machine, piped in soft pastels and topped with two tiny edible dolls. Lily and Rose, now 6, twirled in matching blush dresses, dotted with embroidered flowers. Their cheeks were dusted with frosting, their eyes glowing with joy. "Make a wish," Clara called, gently clapping along with the guests. The girls squeezed their eyes shut. Twin candles flickered. 2 wishes were made. Later, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, and the last guests trickled away, Clara knelt by a table, stacking used plates and folding napkins. She was humming without realizing it. Behind her, footsteps approached. "Mommy," she turned. Lily and Rose stood there, each holding one of Julian's hands. The twins were still barefoot grass clinging to their feet, crowns slightly askew, but their grins were impossibly bright. Lily stepped forward, holding a small velvet box. She placed it in Clara's hand. Rose leaned close, whispering loudly. "Daddy said, 'You're the thread that kept him from falling apart.'" Clara's heart caught in her chest. She slowly opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, delicate, with a tiny stone set in the center. But what made her eyes brim with tears was the engraving inside the band, stitched by Grace. When she looked up, Julian was already kneeling before her. "I don't have a big speech," he said softly. "Just this. You've held all 3 of us together from the moment you didn't have to. And if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life stitching every day with you." Clara couldn't speak. She nodded, biting her lip, and the girls squealed in delight, hugging her legs. Julian stood wrapping them all in his arms. They didn't need fanfare. This was a family. Later that night, when the garden was quiet and the twins were asleep upstairs, Julian brought Clara a small envelope. Inside was a photograph, worn carefully taped down the middle. The image was whole now. Elena smiled from one side, holding two swaddled infants. On the other, Julian stood beside her eyes, younger, filled with hope. Together, they were the family that once was. Clara turned it over. Faint handwriting bled through the back, just legible. For the one who finds them, please love them like we do. Elena Thorne. Clara's breath shook as she traced the words. She placed the photograph inside a delicate silver frame and set it near her sewing machine, the first one Julian had restored for her. Just below it sat a tiny pair of pink baby shoes, the very first thing she ever stitched for the girls back when they were nameless strangers in a snowy night. As the evening faded, the final image was quiet and simple. The four of them sat together on the porch steps. Lily leaned against Rose, both giggling softly about some secret only they understood. Julian's arm rested around Clara's shoulders, his hand gently brushing hers. The stars came out, and for the first time in years, there was no storm, no fear, no aching silence, just peace, just family, stitched at last by love. But the story didn't stop on those quiet porch steps. 6 months later, the town of Willow Creek witnessed a celebration unlike any other. It wasn't held in a grand city ballroom, but right there in the garden behind the shop, where the snow had once hidden two tiny miracles. Clara walked down a specialized aisle lined with spools of colorful thread and wildflowers. She wore a dress she had spent months creating, not of silk or satin, but of simple flowing lace. But it held a secret. Sewn into the lining, right over her heart, was a small square of deep purple velvet, cut from the very basket that had brought the girls to her door. Lily and Rose, now officially adopted, and bearing the name Thorne Reed, skipped ahead as flower girls tossing petals, not with grace, but with wild, uncontained joy. When Julian took Clara's hands at the altar, his voice didn't waver. "I once thought my life was a tapestry that had been torn beyond repair," he said loud enough for the weeping guests to hear. "But you didn't just patch the holes, Clara. You wove a completely new masterpiece." As they kissed, the wind chimed through the trees, sounding suspiciously like a blessing. They didn't just build a marriage that day. They built a legacy. A reminder that while DNA forms a body, it is love, fierce, stubborn, patient love, that truly forms a family. And in the window of the shop, the sign remained promising that no matter how unraveled life became, there was always hope waiting to be stitched back together. Thank you for journeying with us through this story. Life often takes us on unexpected paths, and sometimes the most beautiful chapters are written after the hardest storms. I hope this story reminded you that you are seen, you are valued, and you are never truly alone. If this message touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. I'd love to hear your voice in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment that changed everything? Don't forget to subscribe so we can continue sharing these moments together. Until next time, take care of yourself.